Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts webinar series. We have a great topic today, and two of our favorite speakers from Learning Works for Kids, Dr. Randy Kulman and James Daley, are back by popular demand to talk about it. They will be talking about brain training and specifically how to improve processing speed and executive function with games and apps. I think the question on everybody's minds, or certainly the one we hear here at Attitude a lot, is whether brain training apps and games can actually help children and adults with ADHD improve their executive functions, processing speed, and sustained attention in any real measurable way. Randy Kulman and James Daley will be talking today about how to identify the appropriate brain training tools for each individual's needs, and then how to integrate brain training with cutting-edge teaching approaches so you can transfer the skills learned in those games and apps to actually the real world, which is where the rubber sort of meets the road, I guess. Let me introduce Randy and James in case you have not had the benefit of listening to one of their earlier webinars for Attitude, which I have to urge you to check out in our archives. They're very popular. Randy Kulman, Ph.D., is the founder and president of Learning Works for Kids, which is an educational technology company. It specializes in using video games and interactive digital media to teach executive functioning and academic skills. For over 30 years, Dr. Kulman has been the clinical director of South County Child and Family Consultants in Rhode Island, which is a private practice that specializes in assessing and planning interventions for kids with learning disabilities and attention difficulties. He's the author of two books, Train Your Brain for Success, A Teenager's Guide to Executive Functions, and Playing Smarter in a Digital World. James Daley is a writer, editor, and digital designer with a passion for creating innovative online media. He serves as vice president and editor-in-chief of Learning Works for Kids. So for more information on Learning Works for Kids, go to their website, learningworksforkids.com. Thank you both for being here today with us. The interest in this topic is always intense. I would also like to thank the sponsor of today's webinar, Play Attention. Play Attention is a comprehensive program, both brain training, neurofeedback, and all integrated, available for both children and adults. It's designed to strengthen executive function, processing speed, and self-regulation. Play Attention has a phone number, 1-800-788-6786. That's 1-800-788-6786. Call there or log on to their website, playattention.com, and learn how Play Attention can customize a program for you or will provide a personal executive function coach. We have two great offers today. This is an unusual one, so I hope you have a pen available. Two great freebies available for our listeners today. I'll mention them now and then again at the webinar in case you don't have time now to take it down. Play Attention is offering Attitude webinar participants a $200 discount on any Play Attention program. Use the code ADDWEB, that's ADDWEB, all caps, when you visit playattention.com. And Learning Works for Kids is offering Attitude webinar listeners a free initial session to a brand new live online executive function training workshop that they are launching this summer for kids. For your first session free, enter your email address at learningworksforkids.com/attitude. That's learningworksforkids.com/attitude. And you'll be notified when the program launches and you can take advantage of this great free offer. So thank you both to Play Attention and Learning Works for Kids for these generous offers. Let me just note a couple of housekeeping matters. If you've got questions for Randy and James, please enter them in your chat box. You'll see in your control panel. They will be giving a presentation and then they'll take as many questions as possible. In today's live webinar, if you have any problems hearing us, please dial in via your phone line rather than using the internet connection. That's pretty certainly the problem if you're having any audio issues. And finally, after the webinar, you'll find a replay of this webinar on the Attitude website, attitudemag.com/webinar. And you'll also find the audio as a podcast in the iTunes store in the ADHD Experts audio section. So with that, let me turn it over to our speakers. And with our thanks again for being here today.
Thank you, Susan. This is Randy speaking, and James and I are going to go back and forth as we talk about this today. So what we're hoping to do is help people to have a better understanding about how popular games and technologies and recent brain training interventions can help kids with ADHD and adults with ADHD. But one of the things that I think we want to make sure people understand is that these are really interesting, innovative, great new tools, but probably the brain training technologies, the games themselves are not enough to really make these into great real world skills. Kind of as you were saying, Susan, you know, where does the rubber hit the road? How do we actually take what people are learning in these tools, which they are definitely learning, and make them into real world skills? At LearningWorks for Kids, we like to talk about how to take game-based learning and make it into real world skills. And what we'll try to do today, and hopefully give you some real good ideas, is how can we fortify or strengthen or multiply the effects of brain training so that it really becomes helpful. We want to make it digitally nutritious, if you will. And we want to teach people how to combine strategic teaching principles and deliberate strategies for generalization or transferring what one learns in the games and brain training tools to the real world. So that's really our goal for today. And one last piece about that is we really want to look at this as it relates to processing speed, executive functions, and academic performance as well. So first, I think we want to talk just a little bit about what do we mean by brain training. So brain training can mean lots of things to people. Right now, oftentimes we're talking about the technologies that people use, but there are really many other ways to look at this. In particular, over the last 4 or 5 decades, we started to think about brain training as something that's very realistic, since we realized that people's brains can change. The science of neuroplasticity suggests that we can actually enhance the brain, we can build structures in the brain, we can change how the brain actually works. And as a result of that, we've had some pretty incredible claims made about what we can do to change our brains. And as a result, when we talk about brain training, sometimes what's happened is the people who are doing brain training techniques and developing these new interventions are describing success that goes beyond what we can actually achieve. That rather than that we're looking at developing skills that can enhance the brain in such a way that we get smarter, we can do all kinds of other things. And so the implication of that is that when we train a skill, a specific skill, that you're going to be improved across many skills. And I think this has sort of set the bar too high. So there's been a great deal of criticism around brain training recently. And I think much of that is because our expectations have been overblown by maybe false advertising at times, maybe by high expectations from other people.
Yeah, I do think it's important to note, though, that the basic idea of brain training, of doing activities that challenge the brain in a way that strengthen certain areas, that form new neural pathways, and significantly change the way a brain works is not really in question. It's merely a matter of how to go about doing that and what can be expected from the types of tools that are available to us. So, you know, people have been brain training for years, centuries, when people were just be given passages of classic literature to memorize, and that's what they did in school. They were training their brain to memorize and repeat passages of classic literature, and that was not necessarily terribly helpful anymore when creativity and innovation are more important. But the idea of brain training is certainly valid. What we're going to look at here is more how to actually make it work in a specific way that helps in the areas that people need help with.
And as James was saying, that there are a lot of what we might call low-tech brain training strategies as well. You know, some of that are just techniques that people use, strategies that they can do. Things, you know, practice and drills makes people faster. And if you think about this, part of what we want to do with many of the brain training tools is to help people to process information more efficiently. Because if they can take certain types of information and process it, work through it more quickly, they have more cognitive resources to do other things. So for example, the child who struggles with reading because they can't sound out words, is going to really have a great difficulty in comprehending what they're reading. However, if we can, through repetition and other types of particular training for reading, help the kid to be able to sound out words automatically, all of a sudden they have cognitive resources left over for that. We certainly hear a lot about different types of other strategies that we're using now, not just with kids with ADHD, but with the elderly: board games, ongoing education, playing bridge, other types of activities that are being seen as important for healthy brains and are considered to be a form of brain training. One that I want to make sure that we give special mention to is the idea of exercise. And I think that physical exercise is something that those of you who either have ADHD, have kids with ADHD, or have children with some learning issues, exercise is incredibly powerful. It changes the brain. I encourage people to read John Rady's book, Spark. I'm trying to say the R because in Rhode Island we don't say the R, but S-P-A-R-K. It's a great book about how exercise helps kids with attention and learning issues and helps them to deal with stress. So even though we're going to be talking a lot here about games and technology, exercise, if I had to give you one thing to do, I'd have you exercise. Now, by the way, if you really want to train your brain, get in an exercise bike and do some brain training games at the same time. The data suggests that when you're exercising and you are doing memory tasks, you actually improve your memory more than if you weren't exercising. So combine them. So when we talk about 21st century brain training, we're really primarily talking about computerized stuff, and here's the deal with that. It's new, okay, and it's exciting. It's magical in some ways. I mean, the idea that we can kind of train our brains like that is fantastic. The fact is that we can make these types of brain training tools adaptive and engaging in a way that other kinds of practice, drill and skill types of methods don't work as well. Some of the early ones, like Big Brain Academy, Brain Age, which you can't even get anymore, were at least fun and exciting. There wasn't a lot of data that said that they actually helped. And oftentimes what happened is when we looked at the research behind this, that we were teaching skills that weren't transferable. And we're going to be using the words transfer, generalization today. And what we really mean by that is is the ability to take a skill that you've learned in one place and apply it flexibly across other situations. So not just be able to do something in one place and do the exact same thing there, but you need to be able to use it across settings and across situations.
And one thing I think it's important to keep in mind, and we'll use this metaphor a lot, is the way that training the brain is and is not like training the body. And I mean, if you were to go play soccer just for fun with your friends and were to run up and down the field and you did that every day, your purpose might be because you like playing soccer and you like the fun of the game, but you would still be training your body cardiovascularly. We'd be training the muscles in your legs. They would all be strengthening and improving. And in some ways, brain training is very similar in that when you use the same cognitive skills, even if it is purely for the purpose of enjoyment, you are exercising those skills in the same way that playing soccer exercises muscles. However, unlike with physical exercise, it takes more to transfer those skills from the game to the more important things in life, like school and responsibilities and organization. And that's where we're going to get into this idea of generalization. Just because you're using these skills and exercising them in a game, really what you're doing is you're getting better at the game. The real question is how you go about then transferring that to the rest of your life.
So there are some brain training tools that are marketed more specifically for ADHD. Probably the most widely distributed one was CogMed working memory training. And CogMed has dozens, if not nearly 100 probably studies that have looked at it. But recently it's come under fire from the press in terms of how well do the skills that CogMed is working on transfer to other places. But the data is pretty compelling. It can improve memory. The problem is with CogMed and many of the other types of tools that are out there is that there haven't been efforts to generalize, to take what they were using in the game and then help people to learn how to apply it in other places. Now, Play Attention is actually doing some interesting stuff with this. Built into their computerized technology is they have generalization and metacognitive strategies. So it's a really interesting idea that the kids are using an armband that uses brain-based feedback so that they remain focused. But in the context of playing the games and doing what they're doing, they're also building in some generalization strategies, helping kids have this sort of metacognitive, thoughtful process about how they can use those skills that they're using while playing this game in the real world. And I think that's the direction that we need to see this whole field go, that we have to go beyond practicing a skill, but thinking about applying that skill and how to make that happen. So here's the big question, does brain training work? So I feel very confident to say to you, brain training works in the trained skill. And it can work in similarly trained skills. So we sometimes talk about far transfer versus near transfer. Near transfer means that we're training or teaching a skill that's similar to what we're doing in the brain training game. But the fact of the matter is when we look at transfer, it doesn't just happen. So if you teach a kid geometry in a classroom, and you expect them to be able to take that geometry and go out and use that when they're building a house or constructing a fort or something like that, and being able to really understand it, they probably don't do very well with that. However, if someone teaches them to do that, if they have a mediator who works with them with that, if they can model that, if when they're learning geometry, they're actually learning in that context, the transfer occurs far more readily. Much of what gets transferred has to do with the type of learning it is. So when we talk about something that's more static learning, or what we call inert, that doesn't really go to other places, it's very concrete and local, that kind of learning doesn't transfer very well. So I have a good example of this for myself. I'm getting to be an old guy. I had to stop running, had to stop playing basketball, but I love sports, as I was telling you, I think exercise is really important. So I took up the game of tennis, bought myself a tennis ball machine. And first, all I did is I just had the tennis ball machine hit the ball to me in the middle of the court, and I was just trying to learn how to hit a forehand with a little topspin. And that's all I was doing. So I went out and I started playing, and I really wasn't getting a whole heck of a lot better. I could hit that topspin if somebody hit it to me right in that place, and I didn't have to move. Well, what I started to do is, fortunately, my tennis ball machine allowed me to put different kinds of spin on the ball. So I started practicing with that. My tennis ball machine allowed me to change the speed of the ball coming at me. So it helped me to get more comfortable with faster or slower balls. I started hitting my backhand and began doing that. And then the cool thing is the machine also moves the ball around. So I would have to kind of take what I was learning in those skills that I was trying to make automatic. So I didn't have to think about it anymore, because that's one of the things that brain training does. It can make some skills automatic. It allowed me to take those automatic skills, and as I practiced it, moving around, I could apply it in those situations. Now, it hasn't taught me to beat some people, because the tennis ball machine, that kind of training isn't giving me the strategy. But when I start to learn about that and talk about that and look at that, I can then begin to add something else to that, which is that kind of metacognitive process, the thinking about how is this training going to help me, and then trying to apply that. And that's a big part of what we want to do with brain training, is we want to add that component to it.
I just want to jump in too to mention, if you were to Google this question right now, does brain training work? 4 out of 5 top things that are going to come up are going to relate to some research that was done last year, specifically around Lumosity and some other rather simplistic brain training games. And it's really important to kind of look at what the distinction is between the kind of things that are said to be brain training and what actual brain training is. I mean, it's kind of like, again, if you go back to the metaphor of physical training, there have been people who have purported to have a few simple games that anybody with any cognitive ability as a starting place can play, and they will lead to vast cognitive improvements. And it's really not that different from, when you turn on the TV on a Sunday morning and you see the commercial for hip hop abs or something like that, where it's like you watch this video for 20 minutes a day and you're going to be in the best shape of your life. real brain training requires more than a simple one-size-fits-all kind of ready-made tool, which is a lot of what has been out there in the past. These few simple games that try to teach skills to everybody. And one of the things that I believe it was the person who conducted the study about lumosity mentioned is, this study showed that an average person won't get very much benefit from this program. However, that's like saying an average person doing 1 or 2 push-ups a day won't get very much strength training. However, if that person is in need of physical therapy for their triceps or arm strength, then that 1 or 2 push-ups a day might actually make a difference, which is to say that the kind of brain training that you are engaging in depends on the kind of cognitive challenges that you're facing. And when they're designed for that, then you can have much better results, and really it's what makes that work as opposed to not.
So part of my role at Learning Works for Kids is being the researcher, and part of my nature is just to want to really look at the studies and look at what people are doing, so that when we're working on projects and trying to develop programs for kids, and I'm also working in my clinical work, that I'm looking at stuff that it's evidence-based, that has some research behind it that really can support it. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the newer technologies and some of the most recent research that really seems to support this idea that we can improve executive functions and processing speed with different types of brain training. So the action video games, Daphne Bavalia and Sean Green have done all kinds of research on this. The data is pretty compelling that these kinds of games can improve a variety of attentional skills. The Bannequet studies are really interesting in this case because they just use very small, casual video games, these short games. And what they found is that they found some modest gains in divided attention and also some games that could help improve reasoning skills. So they were able to kind of find some games, small games, short games that can improve executive functioning issues. The Brain HQ is doing some cool stuff, particularly with the elderly. Their stuff is often around processing speed, which is fascinating to me because James doesn't want to mention this, but he and I are in the process of trying to write a book on processing speed. And their research is primarily around that, and they found some compelling data with the elderly that they can actually improve processing speed in ways that can hold fort for about 10 years. In other words, you train the processing speed with a few booster sessions, and the processing speed skills improve and continue to improve over 10 years. They've actually had some really good data that those people who take that type of training can improve their driving skills. Now, Project Evo is really an interesting program as well. They're actually developing something called digital medicine. They've developed a video game that is based upon on focus and attention. Okay, so and the cool thing about it is that when they started to do this digital medicine, and they're actually going for the approval of the FDA, is they started by hiring video game makers, okay, to develop this game that helps kids develop something called cognitive control. They've actually had some research that suggests that the same types of games can help kids and adults with depression. Meteor is an interesting new development as well. That comes from a company called Neuromotion, and they try to teach kids emotional regulation skills, controlling the game with a heart rate monitor. So that's a really cool thing. And they again have some excellent research. It comes out of the original research comes out of Boston Children's Hospital. Virtual reality, there's incredible opportunities for that. The thing about virtual reality is when we talk about generalization, we say, can we take this skill and apply it in another situation? Well, virtual reality allows us to make those other situations right there. So in theory, we could do some of the types of things we're doing in games and then create a virtual reality where that game becomes the place that kids are actually playing.
I just want to throw in that I did actually get a chance to try Meteor a bit with my 10-year-old daughter, and it is a really interesting tool. It basically comes with an armband that measures the child's heart rate, and that links up with a tablet where the kid will play games, and the games are made more frustrating and less frustrating based on the heart rate, while also trying to teach kids how to take deep breaths and kind of like meditation and visualization exercises to calm themselves down while they're getting more frustrated with the game. And it kind of goes back and forth with making it harder or easier depending on how good a job they're doing at slowing their own heart rate. So it's a really, really interesting tool. I will be testing it a bit more, but it's definitely something to look at.
So let's talk a little bit about where we're at with brain training right now. First of all, I would say that we're in the infancy of developing and learning about these tools. And some of them, and some of the claims at least, are made on almost a false premise, which is that we can train a skill and it's immediately going to be useful in another setting. As I was saying before, transfer generalization is not easy. It doesn't just automatically happen. In fact, for most things, it doesn't happen. But we're holding brain training to, that bar. That's what we're expecting from it. A couple of other things that are going on with, I think, the current brain training tools, which is that some of them underestimate the amount of training that's needed to make something truly automatic. So I'll go back to my forehand, okay? It's not automatic yet, okay? I've trained for many, 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 many hours. I can't tell you how many hours I've trained for. So things require an awful lot of practice to make them automatic. And even then, when they're automatic, then we have to be able to practice and apply them in skills. As James was saying, sometimes what happens is we're not targeting an area of weakness. The company SharpBrains, which you can go to online, sharpbrains.com, talks about some of the conditions for brain training to work. And the first thing it says is that you've got to target an area of weakness, okay? If you try to do an area of skill, you're not going to see that much improvement. So we can train, for example, kids to improve their processing speed, but the kids who are going to see the most improvement are the kids who are going to be the weakest in it. Just like if we were training kids to go run faster. If we took the slowest kids in the class, we could train them and definitely make them run faster. We're probably not going to make them into Olympic athletes. We're probably not going to make them into being on their high school track team, but we can definitely improve it. We might be able to improve them 30 or 40%, whereas the kids who are already fast at running, maybe just a little bit. Motivation, focus, engagement with games and technology, which is one of the reasons we're using technologies to do this, is not enough. The other thing is that some of the criticisms of these brain training games is that the tools that we use, the neuropsychological test measures that we use to measure to see whether these tools are actually enhancing a particular skill, sometimes are not particularly good at measuring those skills themselves. Now, I can say that as a neuropsychologist because I know about those, but most people don't really necessarily know that. And the last thing is that most of them have very few maintenance strategies. In other words, there's not an ongoing training. So, you start running, okay? If you decide that you're going to become a runner and you start running for 6 months and you've improved how far you can run and how fast you can run, and then you stop, guess what? 3 or 4 months later, you're almost going to be back at the beginning. And by 6 months later, you will definitely be back at the beginning. You'll have to start retraining. So you have to keep these things trained. You have to maintain training. So how can we do it better? First thing is, let's make sure that the training fits the need. As we were saying before, that's easy enough. Let's make sure that there's enough time to do the training, to develop automaticity. Make it really fun. So it's a favorite activity. It really engages the full attention of people. And attention is really important in making these things work. If anybody's interested in this, Daniel Goleman just wrote a really good book about, it's called Focus, and he talks about how the first step for learning is attention, and he's right. Another thing we need to use is we need to use maintenance training, okay? We need to give feedback to the people who are doing this so that they can see their improvement and know what's going on. And then we need to use strategic teaching, okay? So we need to work with the people who are being trained and help them to know what are they being trained on. We have to help them, we have to partner with them. They have to know the goals. They have to be explicit. They need this metacognitive process so they can actually preview and think about how is this skill going to help them. And then we need to provide this ongoing feedback. So we're thinking and doing, not just training. And I think that becomes important.
I also want to point out the importance of focused practice that it's not simply enough to do something that's good for you over and over again and think that you are continually going to get better at it. It's kind of like the back and forth between Malcolm Gladwell and his 10,000 hours of practice and Anders Ericsson, the person who did most of the research on that, who claimed that Gladwell somewhat misrepresented him in that it is not simply enough to do 10,000 hours of practice on something, but that you actually need to constantly be challenging yourself, and you need to, usually with the help of a coach, be setting goals, be consistently moving the bar a little bit forward so that you're going into a place of being a little bit uncomfortable and then moving past it. And that is the same whether you are trying to learn to be a musician, a gymnast, or you're just trying to change the way your brain works. It's not simply enough to do the same thing over and over again, especially if that thing is easy. It needs to be something that's consistently challenging you in a way that's, pushing you to an uncomfortable place and then overcoming that discomfort. That's how any progress is made, especially in something like this.
So this is part 2 of what are the things we can do to make brain training more effective. So we've talked about the term metacognition before, being reflective. We want to make the learner more consciously aware of the goal of transferring what they're doing in brain training to someplace else, how and where to apply it, to be introspective, to understand the implications of the transfer. We want to provide them with close practice experiences and knowledge, something that psychologists refer to as hugging, something that's close to it, and then far experiences, something that allows them to go a little bit beyond that. We call that bridging. We want to use multiple examples, multiple ways with slight variations. As I was talking to you before about hitting my forehand, I want to change the speed of the ball coming over. I want to change the amount of spin, but have it be in the same place. We want to teach mindfulness, attention, looking for the common elements of the skills that they have and where they can be applied. We want to recognize that this is not going to just happen on its own, that we got to place this learning into context. We have to get people to think about it and try it in different situations. We want to use analogies. We want to have people think about where else this could be used, scenarios that could prompt the appropriate use of the skill. Training should involve quizzes, questioning, ways of getting people to think about it. Some of the best kinds of study skills that we know about that involve interleaved practice. In other words, not just doing the same thing time and time again, but doing something, then switching to something else. There's a great literature on the best study skills that can really be applied here as well. And we want to create training and learning goals that are more about learning and applying the skill than about getting better at a particular thing in a game or in a brain training tool. And if we can, we want to use virtual scenarios to practice the trained skills. That's coming.
I just want to reiterate the idea of the importance of coaching for metacognition. I think that's really one of the most important pieces here and what often gets missed. It's something we've been talking about for years at LearningWorks, which is that simply sitting your kid down in front of a game, even if it is a game that is perfectly situated to challenge certain cognitive skills, it's not going to be helpful if you don't afterwards or have a teacher or somebody else sit down with that kid and discuss what was it in the game that happened, what happened when you were challenged, and how did you overcome that challenge? How is that similar to the challenges that you're facing at school or with your friends or in these other scenarios? That's really what forms the difference between the soccer metaphor I talked about earlier. Just running for the sake of running will in fact help your leg muscles to a certain degree. However, the brain is different. You really need somebody externally to help you create that metacognitive connection to the other parts of your life and to the real world situations, which are the reason why you are engaging in the brain training to begin with. So yeah, that metacognition, especially with the external help of somebody who can point those things out to you, is huge.
So there's some other ways that we can think about using games and technologies to help with brain training as well. One of them is simply just finding other games that use similar skills to some of the brain training techniques. So this is sort of that kind of widening out the type of experience where you're actually practicing the kinds of skills. Another whole idea about using technology is really not brain training, but it's one that I'm particularly interested in, and that is, how can we use technologies to improve processing speed? So one of the things that I find to be fascinating is that there are lots of technologies that can make kids go faster. Think about this. A kid walks slow. We give them a bike. They go faster. Think from the assistive technology standpoint. For a lot of kids with ADHD who have processing speed issues, who have difficulties with writing, teaching them typing and dictation skills is just an incredibly powerful tool. I don't understand why we're not doing that with virtually every kid over the age of 8 or 9 that can use those skills who struggle with writing. I just don't get it. We can use coaching and technologies, as James was saying. Some of the work that we're doing now with our LearningWorks Live program teaches kids about metacognition, gets them to think about the skills that they're using. Even when they're playing a game. So we'll have kids, for example, playing the game Minecraft with other people, and we're talking about the executive functioning skills that they're using, and the kids are asked to talk about that. They're asked questions. The metacognitive process goes on, and then they actually connect it to an activity, because in talking about that, they're actually going and building something and doing something using that skill, and then also communicating about how they might use that skill in the real world. So a lot of these kinds of technologies can be very powerful, but they become so much more powerful when we connect them to real world skills. And that's really, what we're trying to get at here. These technologies are here, it works, but let's not overhype it. Near transfer happens. We can see the transfer, we can see the development of new skills, but we need to kind of go beyond that. And going beyond that could involve building some of that stuff into games and technologies themselves. Some places are doing that. For example, now we see how Play Attention has begun to do that. Project Evo, Mightier are also tools that are trying to build some of those kinds of things in with their supportive work. Brain HQ has done that. So finding those technologies that do that can be very helpful, and that's really the direction we see ourselves needing to go. So Susan, we're ready for you for questions.
Great, thank you guys so much. A clarification question. Julie would like you to define the terms hugging and bridging. Okay,
so think about hugging, and you're hugging someone, so it's close. It's a close transfer. It's a very similar kind of thing. Or if we thought about something that was hugging next to each other, so that we're going from one skill that's very close or hugging the other skill. So it's an easy type of transfer. It's, we talk about near transfer and far transfer. Think about that as near transfer. Bridging, think about a bridge from one thing to another. We have to make that connection. That involves a more metacognitive process, that involves teaching, that involves coaching, that involves using analogies. It involves kind of making that kind of connection cognitively, making the bridge between this skill and another skill.
Okay. So to the listeners, could you please post your specific interest in brain training? I'm seeing a lot of questions from adults, and I'll start to relay those to the speakers, but I want to clarify with you. Please post what your interest is. Is it for a child or an adult, and what is the specific skill that you are trying to address or improve? Okay, so there are a number of people who are adults on the call, Randy and James, and specifically they are wondering, as people who have never played video games in their lives, and some of them are saying, I'm a baby boomer, I've been diagnosed late in life, is this really an option for them to work in this kind of environment in order to improve processing or attentional skills? Are they candidates for mind building training skills?
Some of the tools are made really pretty much for adults now. The brain, I would encourage people to go check out the stuff at Brain HQ. It's Posit Science, and their stuff is primarily for adults, directed to adults for improving processing speed and other executive functioning skills. They're, you know, they're pretty engaging. Again, I always encourage people to go to these kinds of things with an open mind, where they're thinking about how can they take these skills and apply them to the real world, where they're using that metacognitive process. But absolutely, yeah, those kinds of tools. I mean, cognitive working memory training has been used with adults.
Right. Absolutely. Yep.
So, you know, so yeah, there's some of them. I mean, the types of stuff that we do at Learning Works for Kids is primarily directed towards kids with ADHD and executive functioning issues. So
sure.
That's probably not where adults want to go. Actually, you know who else is doing some of this stuff is AARP.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know about the research behind it. I don't know how good it is, but they're doing some of that stuff. I mean, and Lumosity, you know, having been the leader in the field, you know, is there. But again, the concern about this is that transfer. How well is it helping people in real world skills? But I think that, you know, with proper coaching and even just with insight into looking at that stuff, there's ways that people themselves can take what they're learning and apply it more effectively.
And I also just want to throw in that while a lot of the stuff that we do, because it's focused on kids, does deal with video games, we have and do a lot with the more supportive apps, as Randy mentioned, which could be anything from, you know, simple note-taking apps. One of my favorites is an app called 30/30. It's 30/30, which is an app where you kind of give each of your tasks a time limit, and then it gives a countdown before you start your next task, just to kind of keep you working through a to-do list in a more timely fashion, because I'm somebody who'll get kind of carried away with one thing and then realize I only got 1 out of 10 things I needed done. Things like that we use with kids because they're just great ways to get them organized and to help them, you know, categorize schoolwork and get all their homework done, but they're not tools in any way necessarily made for kids. Now, those aren't necessarily brain training per se, but
right.
One of the things that we've you know, found is that brain training alone, while helpful, is not nearly as powerful as kind of taking that two-pronged approach. Or what are the things that can, you know, make these deficits that you have work better? So I know I'm not going to be able to just pay attention at time, and I can try to brain train to make that better. But if I'm also using apps that actually help me keep track of time at the same time, then that is much more powerful than doing one alone.
Yeah, if I could add one thing to that, a very simple way that I think about this is that many of the games that we look at that are out there are practicing the skills. So they're actually practicing. It's kind of a drill and skill kind of thing, but it's a more fun, engaging thing. Whereas the apps are supporting weak skills. So I'll go back to my bicycle metaphor, which is, you know, that's an assistive technology that helps somebody to go faster. So the apps can support a skill, but not necessarily practice it.
Can you, I think that's an interesting distinction between games and apps. Can you give examples of each of those so that the listeners clearly understand the difference between a game and an app?
Sure. So, I mean, you know, a simple way of looking at that is, I mean, a game is, especially we're talking about video games, essentially. They are literally games. They're puzzles. They are, you know, anything from, you know, deep role-playing games that you'd play on an Xbox to little puzzles that you'd play on a phone. But the idea behind them is that you are, in order to win at the game, in order to be successful, you have to engage with certain cognitive skills. That's really what makes games. Whereas apps are tools. They're tools that you use for any one of 100 different purposes, and whether that is something like Evernote, where you can just keep all of your different information well sorted and organized and available at your fingertips, or something like a timer, like the 30/30 app I was just talking about. They're tools that just help you to do things, and depending on what kind of struggles you have, different tools will be helpful for you in different ways. But that's really the distinction we make between
Sure.
games.
Okay. That's really helpful. So I guess we're going to talk mostly then about games or brain training as opposed to apps for the balance of our time. So some of the questions are, you know, are difficult for me to pose to you because they're hard to answer, but let me try one. I have a 10-year-old daughter who really needs to have processing skills improved. Where should I start? That's a classic question that we have here.
Well, so every time I have a parent come into my office and say, my kid has processing issues, I say to them, not rather naively, if you will, I'm not sure what that means.
Right.
Because it means so many different things to so many people.
Right.
And I typically interpret that as meaning my child is slow to process information.
Right.
But even then, I don't know, does that mean they're slow to hear something and be able to respond? Does that mean they're slow to do their homework when they have to write it? Does that mean that they're slow in perceiving something and figuring out what it is? So even then, I don't know what it is. So I'll answer the question, but I'm saying I don't really, I don't know what question I'm answering.
So partly what you're saying is, before you get started, you need to do a better job of identifying the specific issue that you want to address. Correct?
Well, yeah. You want to know a little bit, what type of processing is this, and where is it having an impact and things like that. The most common thing that I see are kids who process information slowly, and as a result, everything they do is somewhat slow. Mm-hmm. They may be slow to respond to a question. They're oftentimes very slow when it comes to any type of homework assignments. Oftentimes that involve writing, but not always.
Right.
They're oftentimes super slow getting ready for school in the morning.
Yep.
They're slow at getting, doing their chores before they have to go to bed at night. Everything.
Right.
They're the last ones to finish dinner. Everybody else is done. And some of that, and so my response to that is, the first thing we need to do is, we don't want to get angry with the kids, because that's just sort of how they're built. However, that doesn't mean we have to leave it as such and not try to help the kid improve it and make some accommodations and teach them skills and strategies that can help them to become more efficient. We can teach them time management strategies. We can teach them how to get started on tasks, what I call task initiation.
Yep.
We can teach them more persistent strategies. And one of the things that we're very interested in is we can find ways to work on improving their speed of processing. Again, this goes with the brain. This goes with brain training techniques. Is that we have some pretty good data now that we can actually increase the speed of processing kids. Now, here's what I would say to you about that. Again, it's that whole thing where we have to identify kids who really do have some slowness in this, and we have to have limited but real expectations that they'll do this. And I'll tell you, that it is really important to try to think about improving processing speed issues with kids. I'll tell you, this is there was a fascinating study as I've been working on this book. I ran into this study that was just incredible. It was a study of, I believe, like over 700 kids in Scotland, where they started the study. It's a longitudinal study, so the study was started sometime in the 1980s. They looked at a bunch of factors in the kids, and one of them was speed of processing and reaction time kinds of issues. And then they checked back in with these people 20 years later to see, how are they functioning, and particularly they were interested in mental health issues. The best predictor of people who were depressed were people who had slow processing speed when they were 16 years old. So 20 years later, at age 36, more people were depressed. The best predictor, and to me, that's not, it makes a lot of sense. Because people with slow processing speed are always getting sort of put down by others. They feel inadequate. They can't keep up with their peers.
Right.
They fall behind in school. It's a kind of a subset of the kids with ADHD, if you will.
Sure.
And so addressing those things, that this parent wants to help a child at 10 years old do that, is incredibly important in my estimation, but it does make some sense to try to determine what do you want to work on, what do you want to improve.
Okay, so we have a listener who said the following, which I found interesting. My 15-year-old daughter has ADD and a significant auditory processing disorder. We completed the online CAPDPTS, do you know that program recently? And my daughter has had a tremendous improvement in working memory and processing speed after the program. So there's a positive story. Since she's had success, I wondered whether brain training programs might also help her. Do these brain training programs work like CAPDOTS, I guess it is, CAPDOTS? How do they compare? Do you know CAPDOTS, what she's talking about? Or
I do not. No,
okay.
But I'm interested to find out about it now.
Yeah. There's someone who...
Okay. Yeah.
When you talk about processing,
auditory processing, yeah.
Yeah. When you talk about processing speed, is that the same as auditory processing, or are you talking about processing speed in general beyond
Well,
just?
yeah, I'm talking about it in general, but that's certainly one of the components of it is central auditory processing.
Right. Okay. There are a number of people who are asking questions that basically demonstrate their concern about screens in general. So they're saying, you know, our kids are very addicted to screens. Aren't we concerned about increasing dependence on screens and screen time? There are probably 10 questions to that effect. So any comments on that issue?
Sure. Well, first of all, only 10.
Yeah.
And didn't they say that the kids were spending all their time playing Fortnite?
They did. There's one of those here, actually.
Oh, only one?
Only one, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing to me. I bet you once we say this, you're going to get about 20 more of those.
Mine too. Fortnite just came on, yeah.
You know, this is the most fascinating thing about what I've learned in terms of working around technology and kids and all this kind of stuff doing this in the past 10, 15 years is we'll present about things that are ways that we can use technology in a positive way, but parents inevitably are concerned about kids being overly involved in technology, and I share their concern. I absolutely share their concern. You know, this is it's a huge issue. Fortunately, not as big an issue here in the U.S. as it is in like Southeast Asia, where video game addiction and internet-based addictions are like just incredibly prevalent. It's a little bit less of a problem here, but it's still a real issue. My base strategy that I go to with parents is something that I think is really important, regardless of the screen stuff, which is that kids need to have a balanced play diet. That digital play, getting in front of screens, is fine in today's world, but it needs to be balanced with other things. And in order for parents to do that, they have to work really hard, because the other things are just not as interesting or as engaging as screens. But they should be, you know, I suggest that they start working at that when kids are really young, where they're helping the kids to develop hobbies. They have the time to make those things happen. They model other activities. They find lots of other ways to have kids involved in active physical play, in social play, in creative play, in unstructured play, that all those things become part of what kids do. However, at some point that doesn't always work for some parents, and then they have to be able to set some limits and restrictions. There are some pretty cool tools out there. One of the ones that we're familiar with is something called screen time. It allows parents to have more control over the kids' use of the screens. But sometimes parents have to go to some pretty severe ways of doing this. They have to put the router in their bedroom. They have to take away the kids' cell phones or at night, or contact the cell phone provider to shut off the internet for the kids, you know, so they can't use their phones like that at night. So they have to do some of that stuff. But it's a real issue, and it's a real concern. But the biggest concern for me is that it's not that the kids are playing video games or in front of screens, it's that they're not doing those other things.
Right, exactly. It's the opportunity lost time.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a good way to think about it. Opportunity lost. Yeah.
Right.
It's also important for parents to be aware of what it is that their kids are doing exactly on the screens. I mean, a lot of times we'll hear about screen time as if it's kind of one general thing, that simply looking at the screen is comparable to every other way of looking at a screen. And often what you'll find is that when there's kids who are addicted to screen time or are really having a problem with it, it's often just one or two different kind of things. Either they're really into one particular game or one type of social media, in which case it's more about addressing what it is about that particular experience. If it is a social media thing, what is it about what's going on with them socially that has them constantly checking Instagram page?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and as James is saying, some content is better than others. We've been a big advocate of Minecraft. We think that's a great game for learning a variety of executive functioning skills, and especially if kids recognize that the skills are in the games, or parents are talking about that, or they have coaches, people teaching them about that. We think that that's a great game. There's and a lot of those kids end up learning coding skills because they want to get better. Microsoft just came out with a new sort of coding program. I forget what it's called. I want to say it's like Code Attack or something like that, that helps kids to make games. So if a kid's there doing that kind of stuff, in all likelihood, that kid is going to start developing skills that might help them get a job down the road. So,
Right.
but again, you want to have some balance. For some kids, more screen time is okay. I mean, kids who are doing great in school and have lots of friends, but have a game that they'd like to play for 2 or 3 hours a day, but everything else is great. Well, that's not necessarily such a worry, but other kids, that's not the case.
I want to just come back. We're sort of running out of time, unfortunately. To your comments about adults with slow processing speed, struggling with depression, that really resonated with a number of the listeners.
Yeah.
Several people posted that that's very much their situation. And I guess they would like to know where to start as an adult with help for processing speed. Is it something like play attention or some of those, as opposed to games, some of those, or you mentioned Brain HQ. Yeah,
that's the one I'm most familiar with for adults. I'm not as familiar with how play attention works for adults. So that part I don't want to comment on because I don't know about it for adults. I mean, my experience and my discussions about that have been with kids. I mean, if the depression piece is a whole other piece at this point.
Of course.
So that I think that's something that people need to address on their own. But the data suggests that some tools like Brain HQ can improve processing speed in adults, and that those gains can be kept. Now, again, I would say, yeah, they can be kept, but maintaining and continuing to practice and continue to do those kinds of things is really important for any of these skills. I mean, we talk about these kinds of things like, that we're going to change the brain, and yes, we see some structural changes in the brain too. But I'll tell you what, I can go to the gym for the next 3 months and start lifting weights and build up my muscles and maybe look like I'm a little buff, not too buff at my age, but a little buff. But if I stop, pretty soon after that, I'm not going to look like that. And the same thing is true for all these kinds of things too. So they've got to, people have to kind of keep working on with these tools.
So in terms of
the depression one, I just want to tell you one last thing. I forgot on this because people might want to look at this. The piece about depression came from the research that Project Evo or the Achilles company has done. It's AKILLI. And they might want to look at that. These are kind of beta games, and I don't know that they're actually available and ready yet. But they actually did a study with adults and found that playing that game.
Did you say EVO?
Yeah, EVO, Project Evo, and it's Achilles.
Right.
Achilles Interactive, and they're the ones who actually had a study looking at depression with adults with their technology. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Just to switch completely here for a moment, because they're to something very different, and that's organizational skills. Some adults have asked about organizational skills, and some parents have asked about improving organizational skills. Do you have any recommendations in that regard? Would that be more of an app than a game?
Well, so apps are oftentimes really helpful. It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things that we're doing with our LearningWorks Live is we're actually doing some training for kids on organizational skills. And the way we do it is we actually get them to learn about what organization means first. So there are lots of games out there where kids need to organize stuff. They need to have supplies so that they can go on a quest. James can speak to the actual things they do in the games better than I can, but they do all these kinds of things to organize stuff in the game. And what we're trying to do is get kids to recognize how they use organization in games, how it can be helpful in the real world, and then actually get them to do some stuff using an app and organizing their activities and other kinds of things within the app itself. So they're actually taking the real world experiences and putting it into an app and using that. So, James had mentioned Evernote before. That's a terrific tool for organization. On a simple level of organizing myself, I use Google Calendars all the time. I mean, an organizational tool that I use frequently is I use Google Drive, or really Google Apps, and I learned how to title my things. So when I wanted to go find my notes for this workshop, it was really easy. It said Attitude Webinar, and with the date, by the way. So then, I could do that. So, using those kinds of, but learning how to use those things and thinking about that is really important. So there's a lot of great apps out there for organizations.
I would throw out Google Keep as well, which is one of the lesser known Google apps. It's kind of like a cork board where, especially if you are like me and you're never going to keep all of your ideas neatly organized in some kind of folder. It kind of works as a corkboard where you can just throw up everything from to-do lists to meeting notes to
sounds great
shopping lists, all kind of exist right there. And it's really easy because if you're on a computer, you can see them all and see which ones you need. It's kind of like the when you're office is a mess, but you still know where everything is.
Okay, one last question here because we were so out of time. Someone asked, I think this is a great question, what's the best way to help transfer skills learned to real life? Is it a coach? Is it some kind of a professional? How should parents go about helping their children transfer skills learned into real life?
Well, I mean, a lot of what we do on our site now is give advice to parents on how to talk to kids about that exact thing. And down to, we talk about when you're playing a game with the kid, here are ways that you can play that game together, and then goals that you can reach together, and here are some things that you can talk about. Now, one of the things we found is that a lot of times parents don't necessarily understand the games as much, or they don't like playing the games as much, and that's one of the reasons why we're starting to do this kind of offering people that we've trained to take that place of being that model of asking people the questions, getting them to connect it to their lives. It's it just needs to be somebody that understands the activity that you're doing, that can ask you questions and inspire that metacognitive process.
Okay.
Parents can definitely do that and should take on that role. The therapists, clinicians, and certainly trainers like what we're doing, they can all.
All right, so let me wrap up by thanking you both and repeating for the audience the two offers that we have, which are very generous offers from Play Attention. Use code ADDWEB when you visit playattention.com for a $200 discount on any Play Attention program. It might be suitable for adults or children. And then Randy and James offering a free session in their online executive function training workshops for kids, which I'm guessing are going to do just what we've been talking about starting in the summer. So go to learningworksforkids.com/attitude. Enter your email address and you'll be notified when the program launches. So thank you both so much for all the work that you're doing and for the information you've shared with our listeners today. We are grateful and we will ask you back. Thanks again, everyone.